when I teach photography or when I do photo walks, I keep on hearing people comment on creativity, or you're so creative, or this person's so creative and I'm not a creative person. And I think that's such a sad way to look at creativity or yourself. I mean, creativity is literally just play. It's creating the freedom and the time for yourself to experiment and to potentially fail.
Good evening, morning, or afternoon, ladies and gentlemen.
Good morning.
And welcome to another episode of the Design Exchange podcast. I'm your host, Thomas Grové, and with me today is David Dredge.
Correct.
Did I pronounce that correctly?
You did indeed, yes. A verb.
Yeah, it's like to pull out stuff from the
river. Yes, yeah, it's very charming.
We are sitting in a gallery space.
Mm-hmm.
Where your work is on exhibition, and kind of just the tail end of your exhibition here.
Correct, yes.
So thanks for joining us.
Yes, thank you so much for the invitation. Really appreciate it.
The title of this exhibition is Mono.
Mm-hmm.
What's that about?
The work is predominantly monochromatic, so a lot of black and white, or cyanotype, which is only blue. And because of this, I chose just a prefix. Mono is not even a word, it's just a prefix to, or it has the power to create this idea of one. So that was also kind of the theme of this exhibition, is having one subject in the frame, or creating collages where I'm using 30, 40 images and creating one piece out of them, this sort of coming together, this unifying power of not only photography, but of this prefix, this non-word.
Before we get into some of the more philosophical topics, let's get down to some practicalities.
Sure.
As you just mentioned, your work on display in this exhibit, I would say, let me try to figure out a good way to say this. It could be fair to say that in the context of this exhibit, I could call you experimental.
Sure. I mean, some of the pieces are, yeah, they're
At least in terms of like
the printing or the process of collage, where it's
right.
Mm-hmm.
So what we don't have here today is. What we don't have is snapshots that were printed. We have shots that you have put time and consideration into the composition, collaging perhaps in post, and then being very specific with the printing methods that you use, right?
Absolutely, yeah. What makes a huge difference? I mean, the more you can control and the more that you are a part of every step of the way, and the more that you can not only control that, but you can affect the outcome, the better it is, I find. And also the more personal the work is. So yeah, I was a big part of every piece, choosing the papers, if it was just digital prints, using the best printers in the city. But also choosing to print a lot by hand in the darkroom, or painting using the cyanotype process, which is really old and very hands-on and so much fun. I think you can just see the corner of this one here. It's, and you'll see it later, Thomas will put it in or pen to this. It's a collage of about 40 images. I had the idea of creating a sort of monolith using some iconic buildings from Saigon, and creating a sort of panoramic of each one, and then stacking them up like a massive layer cake. And the idea in my head initially was just something I'd never tried before, something I'd never seen before. But I'd seen collages, and I was really inspired by this technique that I'd done, I guess, in preschool, and I'd seen a lot of artists making amazing work. Anyway, so I I had this idea. I saw it in my mind. I knew how I wanted to shoot it. I knew the buildings I wanted to shoot, including we have the Center of Parliament. We've got the National Gallery, the Reserve Bank, and the Post Office. Initially, it was meant to be really tall and thin, like a monolith. But after about 4 or 5 days in Photoshop, and after the first 2 shoots, I thought that's good. That's a good place to stop. So after coming up with a concept, I knew I wanted to shoot it. I knew I wanted the final result to be in black and white. So I went out on 2 mornings and I captured the photographs without a tripod. A lot of the places you can't actually put a tripod down, you're not discouraged anymore, but this is only in recent years where you can photograph these buildings. I remember being in Saigon, even as like 3 years ago or 2 years ago, where they had signs up, no photography of this building, and they don't anymore. It's just that the armed security guards now tolerate photographers, but perhaps not tripods. So I'm mentioning that because it's much easier to stitch images together if you capture them from one vantage point and overlap them. I wasn't able to do that, so I walked along the buildings and captured little stills along, and then hand stitched them. And then once I had these, 4 gig panoramics, I would downsize them and basically stack them up like a layer cake. Yeah.
And just for reference, some of your higher resolution works, what kind of size files are we talking about?
Well, my computer can only handle, there's a max, for my setup, there's a max of 4, I mean, you can work on huge 8 or 9 gig files, but you can only save a 4 gig to file. So I have to downsize. So the size of each layer is 4 gig. So I make one, and I save it as the max and the biggest it can be. And if I printed one panoramic, it could be, I think it's about 2.5 meters long. And then basically when I have multiple layers that I'm trying to fit together or move with the transform tool, I slowly do that, and that's maybe, so 2 layers would be 8 gig. And then once that's done, downsize that, and so you're always working with 2 4 gig, if that makes any sense. So 8 gig, and then you downsize that and save it as 4, and then build up and up and up. Or you do 2 pieces, and then you work on the next 2 pieces, and then bring those in and save it, if that makes any sense. It's just it's a lot of like problem solving and working with the layers and crossing bridges and solving problems as you get to them. And
finally, with that painting, how did you choose to print it in terms of the materials?
Okay, so I met Danny from VG Lab, and Danny is just an amazing printer. He works with fine art papers, and his work is just incredible. He works with all the top guys in the city, and so yeah, I shoot a lot with Ilford film. So I sort of bias toward using Ilford, and Ilford has an excellent range of products, not only photo or light-sensitive photographic paper, but these fine art papers. So the collages are on metallic paper, which is it's not glossy, but in the highlights it has a lovely sort of almost glittery quality, and it's lovely. It's really, really pretty. It's a little pricey, but it's worth it. Yeah.
Yeah, I noticed it almost gives the print a 3D effect.
Sure. Yeah. There's a lot of depth. Yeah.
The shadows kind of recede
Sure.
into the background, and the highlights feel closer.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you definitely get what you pay for, and it pays really when you're printing to spend the time in doing tests and in looking at sample papers and really, I printed this a lot smaller than I initially wanted to, just because I wanted to have it on this paper. And here in Vietnam, we were limited to this size. It's the maximum sort of length that I could print this. Yeah.
Okay, the next series of prints, female nudes. Tell us about the printing process.
Sure. So this is a very small part of what I do. Not only printing, but photographing nude or fine art nude. But the printing technique is really old. It's called cyanotype, and it's I think over 200 years old, and it involves mixing this yellow syrup and physically painting the surface that you want to print on. You can print on table, you can print on fabric, you can print pretty much on anything that you can carry into the sunlight. So I chose a watercolor paper, a huge 60 by 80 sheet, and I painted them on in subdued light in the shade. And then I had taken digital photographs or digital images and created these huge 60 by 80 negatives, basically. And it's a contact printing process. So once you have your light-sensitive paper, you lay the negative transparency onto the paper, and you sandwich it between two layers of tempered glass. So it's really heavy. And then you got to wait for a really nice, sunny, clear day, and you carry it out into the sunlight, and you physically watch it change from yellow to a deep, what they call Prussian blue or cyan. And then as the sunlight hits it, it changes eventually to like a gray or an ash gray color. And then you carry it back into the dark, and you take it out, and you wash it in tap water. And then you get this lovely sort of blue or Prussian blue tone or print. And you can also, I mean, it's dependent on the paper as to the contrast and the color that you're actually going to get. So if you were to use a different paper, you'd get a slightly different color or a different contrast. And a lot of people tone the work, so they soak it in red wine to give the highlights of sort of pink pop, and makes the tannins in the wine makes the Prussian blue turn to like a purple, which some people really like. Other people tone it in coffee or tea, and that has the same effect as like in an art class with a kid who's trying to make his pirate treasure map look really old. It has that kind of effect. So it makes the highlights or anything white turn to that sort of sepia or aged color, and then it has only a very slight effect on the blues, making it slightly darker or gray. And then if you use tannic acid, which is sort of a concentrated tannin, it can make the blue a black or a gray without damaging the highlights at all. So there's a lot you can do with it. And while you're printing, if a droplet of sweat goes onto the paper, it will affect the chemical reaction. Or if you were to use lemon juice or tomato juice or any kind of acid or alkali on the substrate after it's dried, it will have a reaction. And then once that's dry or once it's exposed to the sun, it will create its own little acid burn or its little, which is really cool. So there's a huge scope for creative expression and playing. I mean, if you have the time, if you could afford it, and if absolutely, there's so much you can do with the process.
And then I thought one of the nice things is it almost has like a blueprint feel to it.
Absolutely. Well, a blueprint is where this whole process comes from. So I guess architects or designers from way before the turn of the century, 19th century, I guess, they would draw out the design of the ship or the building that they designed. They draw it out on a plastic or maybe like a grease-proof paper with some very heavy black lines, and then they would do the same process. So they would to duplicate it, because this is way before the printing press. So they would in the dark also, or in a shady area, they'd print or they'd paint all of these papers and let them dry, and then expose them to the sun with this the actual design on this transparent sheet expose it to the sunlight, and then physically create these prints. And when you washed them, the black line would create a white line because it's contact printed, and it's creating that shadow, which is etching out onto the paper. And everything that's not obstructing the light from the sun would turn that deep cyan or Prussian blue. So the print itself it's entirely blue, but you'd have all the fine details of the figures and the measurements and yeah. And then basically so you could do one master copy, and then you could do an unlimited number of blueprints, which were given out to the bricklayers or the steel workers or whatever in the project, and then they'd be rolled up into those. Yeah.
You have your panoramas
Mm-hmm.
and the bicycle fish type one. Is that still on the wall, or did you deliver that one already?
Oh yeah, that was sold. So that's over here. That was another collage.
Oh, that one was
Yeah,
here.
that was so it's yeah.
Okay, well.
It was meant to be a series of 5. I wanted to do at least 5 big digital collages and print them on metallic paper, but I underestimated how long it was going to take me to print do the analog darkroom printing, which we'll get to a little later, or the cyanotype printing. Around the time I was printing, it was still sort of the tail end of the wet season, so there was a lot of rain, and also the smog, like the haze in Saigon. Just the quality of light, it's not particularly strong or nice to be out in. So yeah, it took a little longer, and physically coming to print everything I thought I could knock out in a morning took 2 days. I have 10 analog darkroom prints, and I thought I could do that in 3-4 hours, and it took 4 days. So 10 prints taking, it's just the process itself is really intensive, and yeah. Especially if you a stickler for detail and you are trying to make it as good as as it possibly can be.
Well, let's go ahead and then work through. Is there anything technical you want to mention about the other, like the skyline?
Sure, the panoramics.
Yeah.
The panoramics, it's a fairly easy process. The hardest thing about making a great panoramic is seeing it, or training yourself to see that wider, a scene that will work and that balances well in that much wider perspective. I mean, as a photographer, you have people who tend toward square formats, and there are others who tend toward the more traditional, like this format is 2x3, and then the one that I really love to do for landscapes is a much longer panoramic. So that's the biggest challenge is really just seeing something that's going to work. Is even if it's one long subject that you can compress into that, or if it's just a scene that is going to balance really nicely the lights or the elements, the foreground. But the process itself is not particularly difficult. It's just you don't have to use a tripod. You just have to overlay the images by at least sort of 20%. And then you have to control the exposure so that you can have major focus changes or exposure changes between your frames. So everything has to be set manually, and it cannot change from the start to the finish. And you also can't dally. So the light is changing. If the wind, especially if the light is changing rapidly, or the wind is very strong, or there's many people moving in and out of the image, you got to start and kind of click across fairly quickly, and yeah, and then just bring it into Photoshop and stitch it together in Panorama, and that's where it kind of begins. That's when you have your canvas to start working from.
Tell me a little bit about where you came from and how you eventually got to Saigon.
Okay. I was born and raised in Zimbabwe. And my family moved around a bit. my father is a pilot, so he has been traveling for most of our lives. So we lived in the UK as when we were very young, and so from Zim, the economy basically collapsed when I was in high school. I was about 16, and the economy basically just collapsed, and the dollar went from, say, 20 to 1 to the US dollar to, 40, 50, 60, in a matter of days. So my father, who had a mortgage on his house that was going to take him 15 years to pay off, he basically paid that off in one paycheck, with change. And it was a very strange time to be in that country. I mean, it's just to give an example. Before I left to go to South Africa, it was this sort of scenario where the supermarket would open and it would have really limited stock in the supermarket, and then they would have a specific price in the morning, and then they'd close for 3 hours over lunch and reprice everything because the economy is just falling so rapidly. They needed like an afternoon price and then close early, and they'd reprice the next morning, and it was just like that. It just tumbled so quickly. So I went to boarding school in South Africa, on the East Coast, and yeah, that was amazing. Like, massive culture shock, surfing and South African culture, which is a much more first world, I would say, than I was. I mean, so Zimbabwe is like light years behind, So that was interesting, and then after that I went to University of Cape Town, and I studied film media production. I was accepted to study architecture, but quickly realized it wasn't for me. I did an A level in tech drawing and engineering, and I was really good at it, which made it a kind of no-brainer. But I just wasn't interested in it, and it didn't inspire. I wanted a more creative outlet, so I changed to study film media production with English Lit. And that's kind of where I got bitten by the photography bug, because I liberated the family camera. Like, being in high school, and my father was really strict. There was one camera in the house, a little old piece of crap film camera, and nobody was allowed to use it. It was only my dad who could use it, and on occasion my mom would take it out. And when I went to university, I knew it was going to be this incredible adventure. And I knew nobody there. I knew nothing about what Cape Town, was, but I just knew it was going to be incredible. I was going to be on my own. I was going to be able to I was going to have all this time. So I stole the camera from my old man's cupboard, and I just started walking around the street and just shooting whatever film I could get my hands on. Knew nothing about film or exposure. It was like a little Fuji point and shoot anyway. But yeah, it was fun. It was an excuse to constantly go out and search for subjects and play and be creative. And it was wonderful. It was a really wonderful experience. I didn't have enough money to develop the film at the time. So it was, it was a case of, okay, am I going to eat noodles for 3 weeks straight so that I can develop this one role, just to see what it is. And I remember getting it back from the lab and just not being able to do prints so this was before scans. This is like in the early 2000s. And just like, holding up the negatives and looking at the lights, and people would be saying, like, you have those photographs? Or, I'd be like, yeah, come have a look. And they'd be staring through this negative, like, brown, like, oh, right, great, thanks for that. But yeah, so that's where it just started, and I met a good friend of mine who was working as an assistant for a professional studio, and this place really changed my life. Visiting that place, he was a German guy, and he had purchased this church. It was like an old stone, maybe like a Methodist church or something, and the city of Cape Town they couldn't. I wouldn't say the churches were abandoned, but they were given back to the state, or I don't know exactly. So that they were sold. A lot of these churches, these old churches, and they're huge stone buildings with these ornate stained glass windows. And anyway, this German guy had purchased the church and parked his Harleys into it, taken all the pews out and converted it into this enormous space that had like hardwood floors and it's beautiful. And he'd put these panels, these light panels all over the walls. And at the time, he was shooting commercial advertising work on like 4x5 and 8x10 positive film. And positive film is incredibly rich. I mean, landscape photographers still use positive film because it's so sharp and because the fidelity on it, the colors are just so incredibly rich. And yeah, so the biggest pros, the biggest landscape pros, I'd say a lot of them still use these. It's harder and harder to get this kind of film and harder to process it. But anyway, so you walk into this church, open this huge door, turn all the lights on, and there'd be these huge like perspex light panels, and you'd flick all the switches on individually, and these big, almost A4 transparencies, positive transparencies would come to life. The light would shine through them, and it was like looking at the most amazingly composed image for if it was fashion or an editorial shoot. But it was, the colors would just blew my mind. I'd never seen anything so sharp and rendered so incredibly well. And I think seeing that just flipped a switch in my brain, and I was just like, I need to capture this. I need to recreate the world for myself, or in this way. I need to learn or teach myself how to do that.
You were working at that
No.
place?
So a very good friend, my roommate's, so my landlord's boyfriend was this assistant in this place, and he was photographic assistant. He's actually a painter, but he was working as a photographic assistant in this place. And he'd invite me in on like a Sunday when he was supposed to go in to do stock take, and we'd take out like a big 8x10 camera, and we'd take out, back in the day it was Polaroid peel apart film, which is virtually extinct now. If it's incredibly expensive if you can even find it. So you mount this huge camera with bellows. You set up these lights to photograph anything. It could be as simple as a rose on a stand. And you mount this peel apart film on the back of this huge camera, and test it, and take the reading of the light and manually focus it, and compensate for the distance, and like the cameras from before the turn of the century, basically. And you'd have this little Polaroid back, so you'd rip it out, and it's a little plastic sheet with and basically when you rip it opens this little bundle of chemicals that runs across between the two strips of plastic, and so you put it under your arm to keep it warm. It's actually also an interesting part of from popular culture. People think that you're supposed to agitate or flick the Polaroid. It also comes from that hip hop. Is it Nelly? Shake it like a Polaroid picture. You don't actually shake a Polaroid picture. It's the chemical reaction happens on its own, and it's accelerated by warmth. So if you put it under your arm or on your stomach, it's the heat that helps the chemical react quicker.
I think that as kids, when I was a kid, Polaroids were a thing. Mm. And we were under the impression that because you're exposing it to air, that flicking it is going to give it more air, and it will quicken the development.
No, it's actually not. Like the old Polaroids, Fuji still has those Instax things. So what it is, it's a little plastic frame, and the front is transparent. The back is sensitive to light, and it has a little bag of chemicals underneath it. So when you press the shutter and it exposes for a second to light. That's registered on the paper. And then when it ejects that little frame or that little Polaroid, there are these two little metal rollers that basically squeeze the chemical out of the little bag or whatever it is, and that gently spread it all the way along the inside of between the two sheets, between the light sensitive layer on the back and the transparent on the front. So it's squeezed between that. And then basically the weight is the reaction between the chemical and the light sensitive backer. If that makes any sense.
Yeah,
and you can speed that up by keeping it warm. So if you were to shoot in snow, it would be a longer time that it would come out. If the air was cold, yeah. So doing this,
that might actually make it slower, right?
Yeah, because
it's
exactly. it's colder than it would have been if you just put it under your arm. It's slower.
We didn't. I guess. I mean,
Sorry,
you see one person do it, and then you just do it too.
That's it. I mean,
right?
yeah. It's also fun. It's because you're doing it in physics. It's happening in your hand. There's this desire to be a part of the process of it. You know, it's so tempting. You have this in your hand, and it's still white. It doesn't create anything. So you want to almost be a part of this process of helping it along. So I guess that action gives you that satisfaction that you're developing.
The other thing that I have a memory of cameras back then having, which is not a thing anymore, is these flash cubes.
Yeah. There's a little prism that you put on to spread the light out. Yeah.
Is that what it was? I got the sense that these things would burn out and you'd have to replace them.
Sure. I mean, the really old ones, they have little bulbs, and it's a really intense pop of electricity from the battery, and just like a normal light bulb, they only last so many times with so many flash durations, and then you got to buy another one. Yeah. And then even earlier, from like the 20s, they had those big 4x5 like Graflex cameras with bulbs on, and basically the intensity of the flash was so much that it would pop the bulb. So you'd have the red carpet with all these 20s movie stars, walking into the theater, and you'd have these photographers basically capturing them, and the flash would pop, and you'd have almost like the flash makes the sound of breaking glass, like delicate glass breaking, and the bulb physically falls out, and then the photographer puts another one in, and then does it again, and you hear this, like, I can't make the sound of delicate glass crunching and breaking, but there are scenes in films where the photographers are scrambling over all this broken glass on the floor underneath their feet because they're trying to capture all the stars as they come in. And of course, it's a click and a break and another one and more glass and more glass.
They would say, "Can we have permission to film here?" And then they'd be like, "Okay, but you have to clean up after yourself."
Yeah, there we go. Yeah. Pretty much.
Did you bring your broom and your pan? Because we're not going to clean up your mess.
Yeah, the assistant. Did you get the assistant to to come in? Oh, sorry, that was like a really long tangent. So the question is where did I come? What led me to this point?
Yeah, how did you get to Vietnam after?
So it was varsity.
Africa?
Yeah. So I studied film and media production at varsity, and I was in a production class to make these student films. So I did a lot of that. That was a lot of fun. A lot of writing too, learning to write journalism, to write radio plays and screenplays, which was a lot more frustrating because I guess when you're 20, you don't really have a lot to say. You're just 20. Your life experience is very limited. So I was just trying to emulate, writing like the writers of Fawlty Towers, or those old English like Blackadder, write stuff like that. But comedy is incredibly hard to write and write well. So, but yeah, it's a learning curve. So it was that. There was varsity, and then came back to the East Coast and started working for production companies on like television sets, making absolutely no money and having to supplement this terrible income by working in a bar, which is where I met my wife. This was about 14 years ago. And from there, we just sort of were inseparable from the time we met. And we just, from this little beautiful coastal town, where there's only really two choices, is either to, work in a bar or work in construction. So it was, okay, we need to get out. We just need to get out of this little town. So we did. She graduated film, and I worked in this bar. Became the manager, and then we moved to South Korea, and I went from earning maybe $350 a month, working 7 days a week, 14, 15 hours a day, and drinking like every day, as you do in a bar, to going to South Korea and teaching English in public schools and earning 5, 6 times that, 7 times that, working mornings only, teaching, students to parrot your English. It was an absolute trip. And Korea it's a very strange place to live. It's a very pretty place to live. But yeah, we did that for 3 years. I loved it. My wife hated it. And then after that, Thailand to do more teaching qualifications. My wife she found this passion for teaching, and so we went to Thailand. We got certifications and qualified courses, and then during our stay in Korea, we traveled here. We did like a 3-week Hanoi to Ho Chi Minh City, and we just fell in love with the country, the food, the people. We just absolutely fell in love with it, and we made a decision, I think, consciously then to come here and to find a job and to live here. And we did. So we packed that up after we did our final contract, and we moved over here. I think we both loved Hanoi, just how old it was and how pretty it is up there, but could only find a job in the south. And yeah, been here 9 years now. And I hated my first year. I think I'm a bit of a country boy at heart, just, like my green spaces, but it sort of grew on me. I found my sort of little corner of the city and just explored it, and yeah, it's home now. And a couple of years ago, I stumbled upon this space, or Ngalp, who's the owner of this gallery space now, and it was just a darkroom before. And like I said, I'd always shot film and struggled with. It was a passion. I loved shooting film, but I knew so little about it at that stage, or how to develop and print it. So I basically took classes, and I started projects, and I started working with film again on the side as a sort of holiday or antidote to the intense Photoshop work that's included with client retouching and commercial work. So that was kind of a holiday where you don't have to retouch, and you don't have to use a computer at all to generate art or to generate beautiful pictures. So yeah, that kind of takes me to there. And then, now moved to this bigger space, and he'd been sort of nagging at me for a couple of years to show some work. And I said, no, I'm not ready, and I don't know what to show, and no. And eventually I just sort of caved. One day I was like, let's just do it. Yeah. And so here I am.
Doing art or doing film for the love of doing it versus getting paid to do it, and what it takes to be able to make it your full-time job and not a side hobby.
Sure. Well, if you love, let me just say, like, to talk about photography as a hobby, there are amazing photographers who never pursue it as their full-time thing and make incredible work, make work that's, way better than a lot of professionals that I know. So there's that, but sorry, your question again was.
Well, when we were talking the other night, I mentioned something about being able to sell more prints. Like maybe if you did this,
Sure.
you could sell more prints. And then you're like, well, it's not really about the money. But at the same time, at this point, photography is your main gig. You
Sure.
are a professional full-time photographer
Sure.
and make your living doing that.
Sure.
So there's a lot of interesting, I think, tension there that would be worth exploring in terms of perhaps, like, I'm sure there's certain projects you do out of passion, other projects you do because they pay the bills. And probably a lot of the people listening might have a creative
Sure.
hobby. Me, I think at this point you could say I'm a hobbyist podcaster, but I would like to be a professional podcaster. Why not, right? So, what are the lessons we can learn? What do you have to teach us about going from photography being something that, like, okay, I have to work a full-time job at a bar, but I'm doing some photos on the side,
Sure.
to now, I mean, it's a long journey, but like, what would that journey look like for someone?
Sure. Let me just say, I've been doing photography on the side, and since I was about 18, so I've been shooting different mediums and doing it basically for myself since I was 18. So there are two definite sides, and you have to be aware of what you're really doing. Nobody is going to hire you, I don't think, to just do things your way, the way that you. I mean, you may be incredibly lucky and find that person or that gig, but it's not likely to happen, I don't think, in my experience. So basically, if you want to make money in photography, you have to find that product or that service that you are offering that people are willing to pay for, and you have to treat it as. There's two things. You have to treat it as a craft that you have to perfect. You have to become incredibly good at it. You have to constantly teach yourself and learn and try to get better at performing, not only like physically capturing those pictures and physically refining them in post-production, but you also have to get very good at posing and dealing with your clients and the business side of it. It's all a craft, and it's ultimately a kind of service that you're providing, and you need to be the best possible service provider you can be. But the other side of the coin is art and the love of making pictures, and I don't think, need to throw that away just because you are pursuing photography as a source of income, you should always still do personal work. Personal work is incredibly important. It keeps you sane a lot of the time, because I think if you were to only do, say, weddings, and that's all you ever did in one way and one style, you'd probably burn out, or you'd lose that spark or that initial passion that you went into, you started out on. So the lovely thing about photography and filmmaking and these kind of creative endeavors is there's so many aspects. There's so much you can do with it. Digital has so many forms and outlets. And the same with filmmaking. There's so many genres of photography. So for me, I dabble. I mean, I shoot black and white film. I develop it myself. I print it myself. I shoot panoramics on digital. I do digital collages. I shoot video. And it's some of it is just sort of an antidote to the other. Oh, like a bit of a break to break it up. Like I've done way too much client work and retouching, so I need to go out with a film camera and just generate the space where I have the freedom to just, make something physically with my hand and reconnect with that love of the craft that I have. So I don't necessarily think it's one or the other. In fact, I would agree that, like, if you're a wedding photographer or an event photographer, and that's what you do, and you wanted to get better at your craft, I think going out and getting a cheap film camera and hitting the streets, and you don't have to call yourself a street photographer or be any kind of hardcore, street work to learn how people move and to learn how to tell stories and anticipate moments. And dabbling with a different genre or a different medium can really help you, especially with film when it's so limiting and when it's so much more difficult, and when it physically, there's so many more mistakes you can make. It's that concentration, it's that challenge, personal challenge that drives you, that pushes you to be better. Whereas if you just stay with the one thing you do and you're chasing the money, and you can lose sight of it, and you can either burn out or it can begin to affect the work, depending on you. I mean, people are different, I guess. But for me, it's not one or the other. It's the beauty of it is being able to challenge yourself and try something new, and more often than not, you learn a whole bunch of things that you can reapply, or you look at something like this big exhibition as not only an opportunity to showcase what you're capable of, but also like a personal challenge to do something, to do a lot of things you've never done. And the real test is in gauging people's reactions and in selling pieces. Like, can you sell a piece? Is it that good? Is it good enough to sell? And what do people think? And that, of course, informs, like, having conversations with you. Like you as you said before, if you were to take people on the journey of how difficult or interesting the process of analog printing is, it could inform the work, and it could make people appreciate or understand what this really is.
When looking at a work of art, you could be judged on the final output. Mm-hmm. Like, how does this thing look like? Without any context.
Just the
just
aesthetic.
Looking at this image, how does the viewer respond?
How does it make you feel? Yeah. Is it emotive? Is it
And then there's perhaps another camp where it's like the process is as important, or sometimes even more important, than the final output.
Sure. Well, I mean, there are forms of art, like, what is that? Is it abstract expressionism? I could be misquoting that, but you have painters or artists like Picasso who would deconstruct, maybe it's a deconstructivism, where they would, say for Picasso, he would do a sketch of a bull, and it would be very detailed. And he would finish that piece, and then he would throw the picture away or put it away and take out another sheet and try to draw the same bull from memory, so reducing the number of lines and the amount of detail. And then he would put that at the bottom of the pile and take another piece of paper and do it again and again until the final piece is just one fluid motion, like one continuous line drawing, where he's drawing this thing, and he's almost internalized this piece, and it's coming from not from sight and from copying something, but it's his interpretation or his expression of what this is. Sorry, I think.
So in that case, you could look at. You have two options, like as the exhibitor. As the curator of Picasso. One is you could show just the final bull image.
Sure.
Or the other is you could show like a timeline of each of the images from the first one to the final one. Sure. And I doubt this is a situation where we can say there's a right or wrong answer to which approach you should take. But as a maker, I think it's always interesting to see what's behind.
Sure, absolutely.
To see behind the scenes and to know about the process. I think you can still judge the final piece of work on its own merit, and at the same time,
appreciate what's gone into it, or the thought of the processor. Yeah. Well, this is kind of what analog printing is about. You have to do it for yourself. You have to do it. It's not an end to itself. It's not, just because you're printing a piece using an old cyanotype process, or you're printing it in darkroom, doesn't necessarily mean it's good or better than printing it digitally. It doesn't. Absolutely doesn't at all. In fact, obviously technology's come a very long way, and you can make incredible pieces digitally, with computers. Even rendering, I mean, creating hyper-realistic, what look like photographs just completely by drawing. But there is something to be said for the craft of making something and being apart, physically apart, using physically using your own hands and being apart. There's a joy in it, which I think is something everyone should experience. And I'd highly recommend any artist to do, to experience and to express themselves, because it changes, and it really, not only do you learn from it, but like Picasso's sort of process, it becomes a lot more internalized in doing that, and it becomes more, there's more sort of gaps in all these several steps to put yourself into it almost. Whereas sitting at a computer and moving files around and working with brushes, yes, it's you, but it doesn't physically have your fingerprints on it. It doesn't, you haven't, physically agitated. You haven't physically worked with the chemicals, and so I mean, there's just that.
You get something with again, what's this process? The cyanotype, where you can't help but introduce random elements, expressive elements.
That's exactly it.
And the beauty is in the imperfections in many ways.
It's exactly. I mean, it's a beautiful part of art, and also creating something that is more organic or more unique, or I mean, you can't in this way you cannot create two prints. I mean, you could do them side by side in the same sun with almost identical printing, layers or the amounts of chemicals or same kind of paper, but they would look differently, and the brushstrokes would come out and render differently. And the same is true of all analog processes. I mean, film has this quality to itself, and a lot of the beauty of it is in selecting the type of film, and it's this taste that you develop, and it becomes there's lots of little things like the type of film and the way in which you expose it and the way in which you develop this. I'm not going to go into that a lot, but you start to identify with certain types of film or certain processes or certain cameras and certain techniques, and it slowly builds and becomes a part of you, and or an extension of just the way you work or the way you, and the ultimate result of all these steps and all these choices and all of these little experiments, let's say, and all this play is this piece that you've really shaped, and that it's this long journey. Whereas I think with digital, it's a very much similar, but the end result can be quite clinical. And nowadays, also digital is a lot of it of digital photography is even on our phone. They have those filters where it's in real time. It's smoothing your skin or adding bunny ears, or you know what I mean. So it has a more honest quality too. It has a more So
should there be an exhibition of, and it's probably been done already, but should there be an exhibition where all the prints are what do they call it, like Snapchat filters, where you have bunny ears or dog faces on all the subjects?
I mean, why not? I mean, if there are people who are interested in seeing that, why not? I'm not a purist enough to say like this is the way it should be done, or this is art, or that's not art. That's complete horseshit. Art is completely subjective, and it is it's the cream that you've sort of taken from hours or days or years of creative practice and play and experimentation. That's what art really is that pure form of, or the best results from all of that creative play or experimentation. So yeah, if you're like playing and experimenting with Snapchat, and you've got like, 10,000 photographs of people from all over the world with bunny ears, and you've allowed them to select their own filters, and they are identifying, and there's this collaborative space between you and the person, and it's like, why not? I mean, definitely, it will create a dialogue, and it will get people thinking, and I guarantee you, people will buy pieces because art is subjective, and because it just has to make that connection. You can't, as an artist, aim to please. I mean, you can try to please everyone, but you're not going to. What you should really do is make art for yourself. Make art that satisfies you, that makes you, that you're proud of, that and hope that people. You don't need to be everyone's cup of tea, but if you're a few people's like premium single malt whiskey, then that's incredible. Would you rather be adored by thousands and millions, but just like, yeah, that's okay, it's like, take it, don't take it, or would you prefer to be really truly appreciated by a select few people who really understand and really appreciate and could actually inform your work or influence you in some positive creative way that would make you a better artist or a better person, or sorry, tangents, man.
No.
You got me.
This was.
You got me on this day where.
But that specific tangent it's like probably the highlight of the interview so far, I'd say. So that's the good point. The tangents are like the waves of. They're like the brushstrokes on the side of the cyanotype. Those are the tangents.
Yeah. Well, I mean, maybe just one. I'll try to keep it short and not go off on a different tangent. But I keep on, when I teach photography or when I do photo walks, I keep on hearing people comments on creativity. Oh, you're so creative, or this person's so creative, and I'm not a creative person. And I think that's such a sad way to look at creativity or yourself. I mean, creativity is literally just play. It's creating the freedom and the time for yourself to experiment and to potentially fail. And fun is a big part of that, and you have to enjoy what you're doing. I mean, you have a limited time on this earth, and I mean, whatever it is that you're, creating, you have to try to love that. You love that time. It doesn't always. Not always in love with what you're doing, but free yourself up to experiment and play, and just treat it as that. Like if you fail, you fail, and it happens way more often than you're going to succeed. And then take all of that play, all of that knowledge, and share it, and learn from it, and let it, see if there is anything truly good or worthwhile in it, and then look at that and try to refine that, or build upon that, or share that more, or explore that the next time, and just do it again and again and again, and you will tap into your own a part of yourself that you're building, and it's because it's just this expression of who you are, and it doesn't matter if you're a writer or a painter or an illustrator or a dancer it is that personal expression. It's that part of yourself that you're letting out, or that you're giving a little voice to, a little bit of time to, and it's not always going to be amazing, but if you work on it and you allow it to come out enough, then ultimately it's going to be your voice. It's going to be who you are, or who people see you as, if you're successful, I guess, at it. So, and if it's art that you're making, as I said before, art is the curation of all that play, the curation of all that time spent,
So the last two things I want to cover before we wrap up is some perspectives on productivity or work ethic.
Okay.
And then after that, where are you at right now, and where do you kind of want to be career-wise, like in the next couple years? Like, what are your next aspirations? What are the next things you want to try doing next?
Sure. Okay, so I think what I should also mention is this is just my point of view. This is just something that everything that I've said is just is a version. I'm not suggesting that you follow this, to a T. It's just something that I'm talking about now. I mean, in a year's time, I could completely have changed my mind. So yeah, take it all with a pinch of salt. But for productivity, I think a lot of it comes down to being disciplined and setting time, like physically carving out time for yourself to work in and to produce in. Even if it's not necessarily amazing work that you're doing, it's doing the work, and you have to physically do it, and as much as you can. So if you're a creative and you are having trouble with just working or being productive, I would say, try to reflect upon your process. When do you work best? You're a night owl or you're a morning person. Do you work best after exercise? Just learn yourself, physically reflect upon that, and try to carve out these little windows and just physically. Thank you.
Sorry. We've been attacked by mosquitoes. So.
I know. Slowly getting dengue. Yeah, so just carve out this time and work. Do the work. And basically, if you are disciplined about it, you will become more productive. It's just, you produce more. And then the more you produce, the more, like I said before, with amassing this creative, all this creative product, is you curate that. And ideally, you don't do this alone. You share everything. You create dialogues with several different kinds of people who you respect. You don't even need to seek feedback from people who like you. In fact, a lot of the time, it's great showing your work to people who don't particularly like you, because then you can get that razor's edge. But yeah, just doing the work, consistently doing work, and it helps to reward yourself sometimes. It helps to, because I think our brains a lot of the time work better if we know there's going to be some kind of instant gratification soon after, and it helps you kind of almost like Pavlovian, response from that. So if whatever it is that helps you, if it's coffee or if it's break or if it's yoga or if it's whatever, the little things you can reward yourself with. So do a block of work. For me, it's like I'm gonna retouch this photograph. I'm not gonna stop until I'm done, and I do it, and then I step away. I go have a coffee or whatever it is, go for a ride, go for a swim, and then come back and that distance, and then look at it again and start again, or move forward from that. But just be disciplined in that, almost force yourself to, because there will be days where you wake up and you don't want to retouch, or you don't, like you're doing a street photography project and you don't want to get out of bed. It's raining, it's cold, or it's the lights shit, or it's hazy out, or there's pollution, and you don't want to do that. But it's in the whole process. It's in the whole, like, going out and physically walking the streets and physically going out is a part of it. And not only does it make it easier next time, it helps you. It helps the practice of it, the discipline, and discipline is a part of your craft. It's a part of developing who you are and how you do it. Yeah. I don't think all these massively talented musicians and artists, I don't think it just happens overnight. I mean, it's a product of, sometimes thousands of hours, years of consciously or unconsciously doing this thing, or working on these aspects of themselves, or this desire within them, that ultimately hopefully comes out or is appreciated or is noticed or sees the light of day. So the other part of the question.
Yeah,
after,
like so. Career-wise, what are the things that you're interested to tackle next?
Sure. I would really like to get into shooting more fashion. I'd love to do higher end, like fashion editorials, just because there's so much wonderful creative potential, and I think a lot of fashion editorial work is just, it has to really grab people. It has to make the clothing and the person look incredible. There's so many things it has to do. But also you get to work with these people who are, amazing at what they do. These models who are incredibly passionate about what they do, and these makeup artists or these art directors or these producers. And in locations that are amazing, and that it's really fun. It pushes you to the edge of what you can do, but when you're out there, you are discovering a part, and you're doing problem solving that is incredible, and that will basically change everything for you, or change your craft, and yeah. So I would love to do that just for myself, basically, and to push myself, my retouching, my shooting, my creativity, my ability to work with others, just push that to the next level. And then hopefully, when I get there, just whatever the next big thing is, like how do you up the ante from that? Like what are the next level of people to work with? What's the next platform to work in? You know what I mean? Which was great. I want to do more filmmaking or videography. I studied at school. I shot a lot of little short films. I haven't written a screenplay in about almost 15, 16 years. So maybe something like that. I haven't written for a really long time. But yeah, I'd love to do that. I'd love to get better at filmmaking and work with filmmakers who are... They're wonderful, creative people, and just see what happens, what you could actually do, or what's possible. It's fun. It's all fun. Yeah.
Well, David, thank you for your time today and for telling us about your process and your work. Really appreciate it.
Well, thank you. Sorry for rambling on so much. Hopefully, it's not all all drivel.
Lovely rambles. If somebody would like to learn more about your work, do you have any websites or social media handles that they can follow?
Sure. My website is daviddredge.com, so DAVIDDREDGE.com. On Instagram, I'm at David Dredge, and on Facebook, I am facebook.com/David Dredge Photography.
Okay.
So yeah, that's me.
Thank you. If you enjoyed this podcast, please like and subscribe. You can watch us on YouTube, or you can listen to us in your favorite podcasting app. And yeah, thanks a lot. Appreciate it.
Thank you for your time. Comment below.
Leave us a comment. I'll read it. I'll probably reply. As long as there's less than 5 comments, I'll definitely reply to all of them. Great. Well, thanks again.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you.